When I first moved to the South Carolina Low Country from the mountains of Kentucky, I was very intrigued with the Gullah language. Of course, if you're not from around here, you might not know what Gullah is. Gullah is the Creole language of the African American slaves. Africans were brought from many places on the continent, thrust onto plantations here in the South Carolina Low Country, and expected to be able to communicate with one another, but they may not have come from the same language group. And so eventually, over time, they developed their own Creole, a mixture of English words and African idiom, and now we call this wonderful language Gullah. Slavery is long gone, but the Gullah culture goes on, particularly the language, and I became a lover of the Gullah language very quickly. My first real introduction to Gullah language and Gullah culture was when I was still a school teacher. I taught 8th grade English for 2 years, and after that adventure, I moved to another school, and I taught 5th grade at Ferndale Baptist School in North Charleston, South Carolina. And I had 12 lovely little 5th graders in my classroom. Actually, I started the year with 13, but one of them was a bad egg. So we prayed him right out of there. Yeah. And you know how it is. If you've ever taught school and you have a bad egg, you pray them out, and they go off for about 6 weeks to some other school and encourage them to prayer, and then they come back. So when he came back, the principal came to me and he said, "Do you want to readmit him to your class?" I said, "How are we for tuition money?" He said, "We're flush. We don't really need the money." I said, "Fine, don't let him back in. 12 was good enough for Jesus. 12 is good enough for me." So I had 12 lovely little disciples, and I really enjoyed every day with them. The first thing when I woke up in the morning, I would think about my boys and girls in 5th grade, and I would think things like, oh yes, we have a reading assignment today where we're going to read a little play out loud, and Joseph's an excellent reader. He will do well at that. And then we're going to start a fractions lesson, and Christine's very good at that. That'll be her moment to shine. I've so looked forward to seeing my kids. Now, I had 12 lovely kids, but they weren't without their challenges. I had a little boy named Mark. Typical, your challenge always sits in the back of the room, and that's where Mark chose his seat. You know that poem about Santa Claus that says he shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly? That was Mark. He was shaped like a bowl full of jelly. He was about as round as he was tall, and he just laughed and giggled and jiggled through every lesson. He never took anything seriously. He failed every spelling test. He did not turn in homework. He never raised his hand when he wanted to say something. Now, he wasn't disrespectful. He would never sass or anything like that. No, he was a very respectful little boy. He was just goofy. He just never took anything serious. And he was my challenge. Now, early in the school year, we had to review what they had learned last year in 4th grade, and we were reviewing types of sentences. And in our English book, we had to learn all about that and give examples of that. And I said, all right, now boys and girls, I'm going to make it easy on you. I'm not going to make you write out a bunch of sentences, and I'm not going to make you come to the board and write long samples. Let's just do this orally. I'll call out a type of sentence, and then you raise your hand and you give me an example. For instance, a declarative sentence. That's a sentence that makes a statement. Can somebody give me an example of a declarative sentence? And my little star pupil, Christine, she raised her hand. She said, "I will go to school on Tuesday." I said, very good. Because we used oral punctuation in my classroom. You remember Victor Borge, the comedian from Denmark who would do oral punctuation? Yes, we would do that in my class so that they could mark the punctuation in their sentences when they read out loud, and they loved it. You know, a period is like, and a question mark is, and quotation marks are, and a comma is like that. So it makes oral reading very fun. Exclamation point was, bam. So if you had a sentence, you could read, bam, yelled the princess. Yeah. So I would let them do that when they were doing oral reading. So she gave a declarative sentence. I said, very good. All right, now, interrogative sentence. And somebody raised their hand. They said, will we go to school on Tuesday? I said, very good, a question. Now, an imperative sentence. And I noticed that Mark was not raising his hand. Now, Mark had not learned what other kids already knew. If you don't know the answer, raise your hand immediately. Because the teacher's going to pass over all the eager beavers to give the dumb kids a chance. And you can disguise yourself that way. But he didn't know how to camouflage himself, so he's just sitting back there goofing off. And I am an equal opportunity educator. And I said, Mark, can you give me an example of an imperative sentence? A sentence that gives a command? Now, when Mark would get under pressure, he would slip from English into his birth language, which was Gullah. And I could see that Mark didn't know the proper answer, and so he just shrugged his shoulders and said, I know. No, that is not an imperative sentence. I said, but I'm going to let that pass. I'll let that pass. How about an easy one? This is the fun one. An exclamatory sentence. A sentence with great feeling. He said, I know, bull. Now that's like Gullah oral punctuation. He was saying, I don't know. And then when I asked him again, he said, I don't know, brother. I said, Mark, come on. You can do this. Stop goofing around now. An exclamatory sentence. And then he said, I know, I got this, Mr. Lowry. And he was so excited that he had an answer. He jumped out of his seat and he said, school sucks. Ew, bam. We were at a Baptist school. I said, Mark, we're going to have to visit the principal's office. He followed me downstairs to the principal's office. I said, tell the principal what you said. He said, I know. I said, no, not the Gullah. I said, tell the principal what you said. Now, lest you think that I never let my kids speak Gullah, that's not true. Oh no, we had a great love for the Gullah culture. We had lots of Gullah children who were the descendants of black slaves in our school. And from time to time, we would have lessons that featured Gullah culture. We would read the New Testament in Gullah. Sometimes we prayed the Lord's Prayer in Gullah. We pop up there in heaven, all the way, holy be thy precious righteous name. We want everything down here on the earth, same like they be up there in the heaven. Give we now the daylight bread we need, yeah, this day and most every day, and forgive we for all the bad thing we done do, because we don't forgive all them what do by the we. Don't let us have hard tests when Satan try we. Let the living be easy. You the holy king, big boss man over all of we, and everything going to be like you said going to be, and we give you praise forever and ever. Amen. Y'all from one of those churches that claps for everything. Well, Mark would slip into Gullah. I said, no, tell the principal what you said. School sucks. And the principal burst out laughing. He said, Mr. Lowry, you're new this year to our school. What you need to know is that Mark has a brother and a sister. In 4th grade, he has a brother named Marcus. In 3rd grade, he has a sister named Marquisa. And they're coming up to you like stair steps. You need to learn how to handle this all on your own. He patted Mark on the back and said, try to be a good boy, Mark, and send him back to class. I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? In Catholic school, they'd tie you up or something. So Mark became my challenge. How am I going to teach this boy when he won't take anything seriously? Well, we were reading in our social studies book about world history, and we came across a chapter on ancient Egypt. And my kids really got into that. They were fascinated with the pyramids and the camels and the sand and all of that. And we read about Hatshepsut, only female pharaoh of ancient Egypt. We read that she might have even been Moses' adopted mother from the Old Testament. And that was all very interesting. And I was thinking about how I could use this somehow or another to get Mark's attention. And then inspiration struck. The next day, when I was on my way to school early in the morning, I was driving down the street, and it was garbage day in our community, so everybody had their garbage bins pulled out to the curb for the garbage truck. And I was driving down the street, and I went past the garbage bin, and there were legs sticking up out of the garbage bin. I didn't even blink. This was North Charleston, South Carolina, murder capital of the world. But then I realized they'd have probably done a better job at stashing the body than that. So I backed up and I looked again, and there were these 2 bare legs sticking out. They belonged to a big giant Barbie doll that was about 3 feet high. And some kid had taken a magic marker and drawn all over the Barbie doll, and the mom had obviously thought, ruined, and had thrown it out. I grabbed that doll and I threw it in the back seat of my car, and I went to school, and I gathered my children around, and I said, okay, boys and girls, you remember yesterday in our social studies book we read about Hatshepsut, only female pharaoh of ancient Egypt? Yeah, she's in the back of my car. And when you see her, you'll see she died from some horrible skin disease. They all went, ew. I said, I thought maybe we could make her into a mummy. And I'm thinking of Mark, because I thought, what 5th grade boy doesn't like dead people? So we went out and got the doll, and I stretched it out on my desk. We went to the custodian's closet, got a big roll of duct tape, and we wrapped up the mummy with duct tape, made her look really good. I said, now we've got other things we have to study today, so I'm just going to set this over here behind my desk. But tomorrow, when you come to school, ask your mom if you could bring a white bed sheet. We'd seen pictures in our book that the Egyptians always wore long white robes. We'll dress up in our long white bed sheets, our white robes, and we'll have an Egyptian funeral. We'll bare hat sheep suit overhead, and we'll have a procession down the hallway, and I'll clang cymbals, and everybody can fall prostrate before the Pharaoh. And then we'll lay her in an empty classroom at the end of the hall, and I'll give you colored chalk, and you can draw hieroglyphics all over the chalkboard. All right, cool. So they all went home. They came back the next morning. Everybody was wearing their white robe, and Mark had Star Wars print. Mark, Darth Vader was not an Egyptian. He said, I don't care. Totally ruined our whole concept. What was I going to do with this kid? The next article in our social studies book was about ancient Rome. And we read about games in the Colosseum, kind of like the Olympics. We read about Roman wrestling. Now, this was real wrestling. Like boys in high school win medals for. Mark assumed that this was WWF, Worldwide Wrestling Federation. And I found the one thing that he took seriously. After that, every essay, every sample sentence, every oral presentation was about Worldwide Wrestling Federation. His favorite wrestler was the Junkyard Dog, and he could tell you every statistic about the Junkyard Dog. And he was all the time using wrestling lingo, pile driving and body slamming and top rope. That was the way he'd give you a compliment. He'd say, that's top rope, Mr. Lowry, right there. That's top rope. Yeah, it is. If he finished his work early, he would go to the art shelf and grab a big long piece of black construction paper, and then he would get some gold foil and fashion an oval and staple it in the middle of that construction paper, and that was his wrestling belt. And he was forever getting in trouble for pile driving his friend James in sandbox on the playground. I would tell him, Mark, we do not have contact sports. We are Baptists. We only lay hands on you if we're about to dunk you underwater. Leave your friend alone. I didn't know what to do. Well, to get a break from the rigors of teaching 5th grade, I volunteered to teach English as a second language at the public library. This was kind of a little service project from our church and school. And I thought, this will be a chance for me to work with adults, mature scholars, who are very serious about their studies. And I thought that I would have a handful of Hispanic people, maybe 2 or 3 Asian people. As it turned out, I had 12 Russian students. My youngest student was 69, and my oldest was 85. And they sat down our first class meeting at the library on a Sunday afternoon and said, we want you to help us learn English more better. And so we had this wonderful little curriculum called Word by Word. And in this curriculum, you laid out a book with a big picture page of life in these United States, and you discussed what you saw in front of you. It might be a picture of a grocery store. And then you would have conversational English, and you would practice how to get through a grocery store, and you would teach them how to say things like, does that include the tax? Where can I find the milk? Paper or plastic, that kind of thing. It was survival English for immigrants to the United States. And we were going along back and forth with our Russian English lessons, and I learned that I had my challenging student in this class as well. Bless their hearts. They would work so hard on their lessons, my Russian students, except for the one. They would labor over anything I assigned to them. They would go home and they would try to write essays in English by thinking through things in Russian and then looking up every individual word in an English language dictionary, and then they would copy everything out. And so one of our lessons was on favorite foods. And you were supposed to ask the students, tell me your favorite food, and they would answer in English, and then you would say, tell me in English how to make your favorite food. So I had a couple, a pair of Russians named Gullah and Avram Mikolinsky. Gullah was my star student, very good English speaker. Her husband, Avram, well, just like my student Mark, he was shaped like a bowl full of jelly, and everything was a joke. He just did not take this very seriously at all. And so I asked Ghana, I said, Ghana, let's start with you. Our lesson is on favorite foods. Can you tell me your favorite food in English? And she said, Mr. Lowry, I enjoy eating hamburger. I said, very good, very good. Can you say that again and pronounce it hamburger instead of hamburger? And she said, извините, excuse me. Mr. Lowry, I very much to enjoy eating hamburger. And I said, no, the That's just oral punctuation. You don't need to do that. That's just a little technique that I use. And she then told me as best she could how to make a hamburger in the English language. And I said, okay, Avram, now it is your chance. This was my student Avram's chance to shine because he only knew one sentence in the English language. I like ice cream. You could ask him what day of the week it was, whether he preferred salt or pepper, his age, and he always responded with, I like ice cream. It was kind of like his I know bowl. So I said, Avram, this is your chance. What is your favorite food? And he smiled broadly and said, I like ice cream. I said, very good. Can you tell us in English how to make ice cream? Long silence. And then he said, for making ice cream, you take wife, you put wife in freezer, and you say, wife, you no come out till ice cream. Very, very funny. I concluded that lesson by saying, Avram, there's a student I want you to meet. His name is Mark. I figured they would understand each other. And I hit on this idea. I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to pair my 5th graders at Ferndale Baptist School with my Russian students as pen pals and let them help each other out. I had a space at the end of the week where the kids had gone to all their special area classes. They had done music, they had done PE, they had done art, and we had about a half hour at the end of the day where we needed something to fill the time. So I went to the bookstore and I bought a Teach Yourself Russian book and tape and did what poor school teachers do. I copied that book 12 times over and handed out photocopies to everybody. You're laughing because you've done that too. Yes, yes. I have a friend who's a music teacher. He says, if they ever really crack down on that copyright law, we will have the best jailhouse band you have ever seen in your life. I copied that book and handed it out, and we would listen to Russian language tape and we would practice. It was tourist Russian. It was like, where is the bathroom? Do you make change in American currency? Good morning, good day, goodbye, that kind of stuff. But my kids loved it. And then I gave them names from my Russian group, and I said, I'm going to give you a pen pal. You will now have an adopted babushka or dedushka, a Russian grandma or grandpa, and you can write to them in English and they'll write you back. Well, it was a stroke of genius. Now I had a real-life situation that made English grammar very important. You would hear my kids helping each other. They say, you forgot to capitalize that sentence. It don't matter, you know what I mean. No, it's not for me, it's for our Russians, and they don't know. They would always refer to them as our Russians. Yes. Like baseball cards, you know. Those are my Russians, and these are your Russians. I'll trade you Lenin for a Trotsky. They would send letters to my Russians. My Russians would labor over little letters that they would send back to my 5th graders, and they would exchange notes. It was lots of fun. And we got along to a certain point, and I decided we should go on a field trip together. So all of my kids got onto the bus, and we rode off to the retirement house where the Russians lived. And when we pulled up in the circular drive, Michael Kogan, a tall, thin Russian man with wispy white hair, very distinguished looking, was waiting for us. And he stepped up on the bus step, and he looked at my children, and he said, Zdravitsvetya, ya Mikhaila. Hello, I am Michael. And they all said, Добрый день, good day. And he turned to me, and the tears welled up in his eyes and started streaming down his face. And he said, oh, Mr. Laurie, your children speak excellent Russian. It's very nice. It reminds me of my baby time when I was little boy in old country. And I'm praying, oh God, please, whatever he says to them next, help them to know what he says, because our Russian was so elementary. And he turned back to the kids and he said, Sadis, pожалуйста, please sit down. And he gestured to some rocking chairs on the retirement center porch. And my kids exploded. They had that marvelous experience of working so hard to access a second language, and when someone speaks it to you, you understand what they said. And they said, he said, sit down. He said, sit down, please. I said, well, good. Hop off the bus and sit down. So they jumped off the bus and they sat in the rocking chairs, and I said, and say thank you for the seat. So they turned to him and said, thank you. I said, no, say it in Russian. And they said, spasiba. He said, da, spasiba. Now, our Russian was so elementary, we did not know that spasiba means thank you and you're welcome. So they would say, spasiba. He would say, da, spasiba. Niet, niet, spasiba. Da, spasiba. Yeah, so we had this thank you, you're welcome war going back and forth for several minutes. And then all of our other pen pals came out and we introduced everybody around and I got everybody matched up. And because we had mixed up the thank you, you're welcome thing, I was trying to redeem myself and I tried to show off a little bit. And when I got on the bus, I said, boys and girls, tell our Russian friends how you order your lunch. I would make my kids order their lunch in Russian every day at school. So they knew all these vocabulary words for different foods in Russian. And their favorite food, of course, was hot dogs. And so I said, tell them how you would order a hot dog in Russian. And they said, da, goryachi sobaka. And all my Russians burst out laughing. I said, what? They said, you say dog on fire. So off we went to the Charleston Museum together. Now, why did we go to the Charleston Museum? Because they have a mummy. We were going to look at dead people. It was going to be very exciting. I had previewed the museum, and I made a long list. And on one side, I had written down all these things that you could find in the museum in English, and on the other side, in Russian. And then I had jumbled the list. So what you were to do is to take your pen pal, walk through the museum, find these objects, and then match them up. We didn't know the Russian word for mummy, but we knew the Russian word for dead, which is kaput. So you would match dead to kaput when you saw the mummy. And I sent everybody off, and I had paired Avram with Mark. I just thought that'd be too much fun. So off they went through the museum together, and a half hour later when they came back, Avram is with his wife Ghana, and she had a little pen pal named Christine, and Mark is with Avram, and the four of them are like a happy little family. It was like two elderly grandparents and their grandchildren, and Ghana, for whatever reason, had taken a real shine to Mark. And she had her arm around him, and she was squeezing on him and poking him in his belly and rubbing on his head and pinching his cheek, just like Russian grandmothers will do. And she turned to me with a big smile on her face, and she said, Mr. Lorry, Mark is good student, yes? Niet. I said, Mark is not a good student. Now, when Mark would write letters to his pen pal, Ghana would read them for her husband Avram, and they were all about Worldwide Wrestling Federation. And so they were filled with all kinds of wrestling lingo, and he would say, yesterday I body slammed my brother outside in the backyard, and she would say, this body slam, what is, I don't understand, it's very difficult. And I tried to explain to her, I said, it's called lingo. It's idiom. She said, idiom. Is it very hard? Idiom. In America, people use idiom. They say, it rain, cat and dog. I know see cat fall from sky. It's very difficult. And I said, well, it's just expressions that you have to be born to. I'm sure that Russian has idiom as well. So we had a little mini lesson one day on idiom. And I said, and while we're on the subject of idiom, let's talk about slang, which is related. When you teach English as a second language, sometimes it falls your lot to help people understand bad words because they don't know unless you tell them. And so we had a discussion of slang, and I said, slang, for lack of a better example and off the top of my head, I said, school sucks. And she said, what this means, school suck? I said, just suffice it to say, it's not something you repeat in polite company. Well, when she was standing there hugging on Mark and poking at him, and she said, he is a good student, yes? I said, niet. School sucks. When she realized that that's what Mark had said, she went off on that little boy. We had no idea that she was a retired schoolmaster from Russia. She looked at her husband, and all of her frustration with her husband's silliness came out on Mark. She looked at Avram and she said, Avram, sadis, you, sit down. He sank into a chair with the little girl named Christine and said, I like ice cream. She grabbed Mark by the ears and she just unloaded on him. She said, Marcus, you must work hard. You must study. You know say suck to Mr. Lorry. You must work hard. Mr. Lorry, nice man. He have good method. He work hard for you. He love you. Mr. Lorry is teacher from God. Forever after that, all I had to do was look at Mark and go, who am I? I know, you're the teacher from God. She said, in Russia, there is not opportunity. There is not education. It's very hard. In America, much opportunity. Everyone happy. Everyone say, happy, happy. In America, it's like Disney World. In Russia, it is not happy. In Russia, people, they say, how are you? You say, oh, my back, my head, the KGB. Well, none of this is communicating to poor little Mark. His eyes are as big as dinner plates, and she sees she's not getting through to him. And in a last desperate attempt to make him understand that he should take his schooling seriously, she grabs him still by the ears and carries him over to a display case all about slavery in the South Carolina Low Country. She did not know that Mark had descended from slave families. And she pointed to chains and manacles and she said, Marcus, no education is like slavery. I saw a little black boy blanch. He turned around and he looked at me and he said, could I have another paper? I said, sure. Could she help me? Yes. So they went off through the museum together. Heads together, whispering things, laughing, exchanging ideas, working on their assignment. It was like Gullah meets Gorbachev. It was a cultural exchange that would make the United Nations envious. And then we got back on the bus and we went back and dropped the Russians off at their retirement home. We went back to school. Of course, the next day, I had my kids sit down and write thank you notes to their Russian pen pals. And Mark sat down and he started writing really quick. And I kept saying, Mark, don't rush it, do your best work. No, I'm fine. He wrote very quickly. He folded up his note, put it in a sealed envelope, gave it to me to deliver to his pen pal, and then he immediately went to the art shelf and took out a big long strip of construction paper and started making himself a wrestling belt. And I said, I told you, you cannot do that. He said, you're going to like this, Mr. Lowry, you're going to like this. I said, I don't believe you, but I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. We'll see. So when recess came, I went outside to find Mark with his friend James. They were standing on either side of the sandbox. James also had a homemade wrestling belt. Mark jumps into the sandbox and he says, Zdravствуйте! And James jumps in from the other side and says, hello! And then they both go, whoa! I said, what are you doing? He said, this is my new game, Mr. Lowry. I call it Russian Challenge. I jump into the sandbox, I say something in Russian, and then James has to jump in from the other side and translate it. If he gets it wrong, I take his wrestling belt. I said, I like it. Very good. You go, junkyard dog. He said, no, that's my old wrestling name. Now I have a new wrestling name. I am Goryachi Sobaka, dog on fire. And he burned it up. He was my best Russian student. I was dying to see what he had written to the Mikulinskis. And so when I went to see our Russians, I said, would you share the thank you note with the class that Mark has written? And so Ghana opened it and she said, Dear Ghana and Avram, thank you for going on field trip with me. Thank you for helping me. I will not be a slave. And then there was this huge space, because he'd only written those 3 sentences. So with a big black magic marker, Mark had penned in, P.S. You is the bomb. And I said, Ghana, do you understand what that means? And she started it. It is very frustrating. I know, understand. You is the bomb. What does it? And her husband, Mr. I Like Ice Cream, leaned back in his chair and folded his arms over his big stomach and he said, I know, bull. It's American idiom.